2025 has been incredibly disappointing if you are a Ferrari fan. After only just losing out on the Constructors' title in 2024, 2025 was supposed to be the year where Ferrari finally won a world championship, especially having the driver lineup of Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton for 2025. But despite all the talent that is driving this car, the car ultimately has proved to not be good enough for this season. And still, after 10 races, Ferrari have failed to win a Grand Prix and have only had 3 podiums in 10 races. And still, as of now, have one of the slowest cars consistently out of the front 4 teams in Formula 1. But why has that been the case? Why has 2025 so far been such a failure for Ferrari? Well, that is what we are going to examine in this video, looking at the actual reasons why Ferrari have been off the pace, why they've not won a race so far, and also we will look at whether this issue is fixable going forward for the rest of the season, and whether they can turn things around and at least get a couple wins before the end of the year. Before we properly get into, though, why Ferrari have been so poor this year, make sure to smash the like button on this video and let me know in the comments below, guys, for the rest of the season, what do you think Ferrari can do? Do you think they will pick up a win in 2025? If so, how many wins? Do you think both drivers will get a win? How do you think the rest of the season goes for Ferrari, and what do you think in general of their season so far? But if we go back to pre-season testing, we all knew that things were not quite right at Ferrari. It was visible in pre-season testing that that Ferrari car just was not on the same level as the McLaren, which has been the best car in 2025. But until we got to the first Grand Prix in Melbourne, we didn't have any data to show that Ferrari actually had a slow car. But once we got through the first Grand Prix, Ferrari were quite far off the pace, and in the wet conditions in the race were quite poor, and ended up finishing only 8th and 10th in the Australian Grand Prix. But their pace in dry and wet conditions was not good either way, and ultimately, as we have discussed before with Ferrari earlier this season, it was due to plank issues. Essentially, through practice, Ferrari were wearing out the plank too much, and because Ferrari feared that they would not be able to get through the rest of the weekend without damaging the plank and wearing it to the point where they would be disqualified, Ferrari raised the car. And with these regulations, these ground effect regulations, when you raise the car, the ride height of the car, you lose performance. It's as simple as that. Now, Ferrari did have to raise the ride height a bit extra for that Australian Grand Prix because of the fears they had, and ultimately they didn't get disqualified, but they were quite far off the pace. Then at the next Grand Prix in China, though, they were disqualified with Lewis Hamilton because of the plank of the car. Well, this disqualification essentially was because the rear skid blocks were worn down too much, and despite being able to lower the ride height, Ferrari were not able to get away having good enough plank wear. And obviously, since that Grand Prix in Shanghai, Ferrari have not had any further disqualifications, but it turns out the fundamental reason why Ferrari still to this point do not have enough pace is still related to the ride height of the Ferrari. And essentially the issue with this Ferrari is that maybe theoretically it is able to be a very fast car, which we have seen very small glimpses of at times in 2025, but because their car is unable to handle, for example, having a heavy fuel load without wearing out the plank too much of their car, they're unable to show possibly the actual potential that Ferrari may have. Now, quite often in this video, I am going to be quoting an article that The Race did back in April, which really does get into this issue well. It is, yes, a couple months old, and obviously Ferrari have brought a couple upgrades since then, so things have changed to a degree, but fundamentally I think this article is still relevant to the issues that Ferrari still have. So, as I got into before in this video, Ferrari are having issues with the ride height of the car and how low to position the car in terms of wearing out the plank too much. And again, with these cars in this set of regulations, the most important thing is running the car as low to the ground as you can without damaging the plank too much. The closer you can run your car to the ground, the more downforce you will accomplish in all areas, front to rear. And there hasn't been, in these regulations that have been around for 3 or 4 years, there hasn't been many teams that have been able to run their cars pretty low to the ground and achieve massive levels of downforce. Red Bull, I would say, is one team. Obviously McLaren. Ferrari, I think, were able for a time to achieve this in 2022. But many teams, Mercedes being a clear example of this, have had issues with the ride of their car ever since the regulations have begun. And really, it's not until this season where Mercedes have actually looked like they've had a comfortable car to drive, whilst also having plenty of downforce. So for a team like Ferrari, if they're having issues wearing out the plank of their car, of course, if they have to run their car slightly higher compared to McLaren, that is going to give away lap time, whether it's 2 or 3 tenths at certain tracks, or half a second or more at others. Obviously, at certain tracks, it's going to affect you more so than it will do at others. But as this race article gets into, Ferrari have been trying to get around this issue in regards to the suspension. It goes on to say that Ferrari have been running, it appears, a slightly softer rear suspension than their rivals, and that extra compliance gives the car good mechanical grip, and it helps the performance a lot more in slow speed corners, which namely Ferrari have been struggling a bit in 2025. And as the article says, the softer suspension means that as downforce loads increase at higher speed, the car squats down at the rear, and that causes it to bottom out and rub the plank away. But of course, as this article does mention, that of course led to Lewis Hamilton's disqualification at the Chinese Grand Prix. But as the article explains, there's only 2 solutions to stopping the plank wearing like that, which is either stiffen the suspension, which costs you performance in slow speed corners, or raise the ride height of the car. But of course, in this ground effect era, that hurts the most in all areas. And what that essentially means is that Ferrari have an issue of wearing their plank out too much when they try to run their car as low as, say, McLaren do. Therefore, they are trying to get around that by running with a different type of suspension, where that can give them the performance they're missing in slow speed corners to compensate for their ride height issues. But as the article explains, with running a softer suspension, that can still cause the car to bottom out and rub the plank away. So it still does exactly what Ferrari don't want it to do in a different way. Now, since the first 3 races of the season where this was an even bigger issue than it is now, Ferrari did bring a new floor which improved upon that issue, but it did not completely get rid of it. Now, according to rumours from certain publications in Italy, Ferrari do have an even bigger upgrade planned, a new floor possibly coming around the Austrian or British Grand Prix, and it is believed a new rear suspension for the British Grand Prix. And these upgrades would be targeted at properly trying to solve this issue. But at the end of the day, this ride height issue is a fundamental problem, meaning that they can only stitch it up, if you know what I mean. They can only make it better rather than completely solve it, as it will always be an issue with this 2025 Ferrari car. And again, since that Bahrain floor upgrade, it is better. The Ferrari car, it's not as bad as it was with its ride and its general downforce, but it is still losing quite a bit per lap to McLaren or whoever tends to be the quickest team at whatever given weekend. So even if these upgrades work, it won't put them in a position I don't believe to be the fastest team, but it will probably, if it does work, put them in a position to fight for some race wins. That is really the best I can see with Ferrari. And if it does work and gives them an extra, let's say 2 to 3 tenths of a second, which would be a decent amount for them, then again, I think they could probably get 2, maybe 3 race wins before the end of the season, but in no way are they going to be fighting for the championship. The championship is absolutely dead and buried for Ferrari on both ends. The one thing, though, I will quickly finish this video with is I really don't understand with Ferrari why they went away from what worked with last year's car. Because last year's car, whilst it was not perfect, fundamentally it was a much better car than this year's car. It was a lot more stable. It was giving a lot more downforce for the two drivers. The only issue really they had with the 2024 car was keeping up, developing the car at the same rate as the others. They had some trouble with that, as we know, around this time last year. But if you look at the 2025 Ferrari car, it was, instead of a evolution, which is really what it should have been, it seems it was more of a revolution, the design for this year's Ferrari, when again, it really did not need to be that. For example, the front suspension, they switched to a front pull rod suspension for this year, a design used by McLaren and Red Bull. Did they really have to do that? You know, considering again what worked with last year's car, did they have to have such a dramatic change on the suspension side? Even if, yes, it did show to have some potential, again, why not just build on what you already were doing well with last year's car? I just don't understand why Ferrari were not doing that. And really, you should only, if you're Ferrari, be doing radical things on the design if you're needing to make up a massive amount of time. Ferrari were not needing to do that. If you go and look at the end of last season, Ferrari were, in a few races, the quickest team. And in qualifying, were not a million miles away from Red Bull or McLaren when they took pole position. So again, was this really necessary? And that's what really frustrates me with this team. They just needed, like I said, to continue the positives of last year's car and just keep getting better. And instead, I've gone for something radical and it simply hasn't worked. And now find themselves in a situation where we're 10 races into a season and they haven't had a race win. But whether these upgrades coming in the next couple races will actually push Ferrari forward, we'll have to see. Of course, this time last year we saw that Ferrari's upgrades really did not work. So my faith is not very high in this team. But if they do work, great. Then we can get to see Ferrari being where they should be, fighting for race wins. But in terms of the championship, obviously it's way too late. But at least we can still possibly get Ferrari winning some races. But again, in the comments section, guys, let me know, what do you think of the Ferrari issues in 2025? Do you think they can be fixed or fixed enough to where they can start winning races? And again, results-wise, what do you think they'll do for the rest of the season? Of course, they're not going to do anything championship-wise, but do you think they can grab some extra wins? Let me know in the comments section down below. Hopefully this video has informed you enough as to why, fundamentally, Ferrari have got it wrong this year and why Ferrari have still not been able to take a race win in 2025. We'll see how they do going forward, but guys, until my next bit of content, which will be the qualifying watch along for the Austrian Grand Prix next Saturday, until then guys, it has been me, Chazza HD, goodbye.